The following program contains violence, nudity, and, oh my god, why are you just run away. This shit is going to give you nightmares. For real. Nightmares where you are running naked on a treadmill made of razor blades, and your third grade teacher is pointing and laughing at you. And even if you survive the treadmill with your feet intact, she is going to tell you that you flunked the third grade, which negates all the rest of your achievements. The program is rated TV MA NSFW OMFG GAF TTV BYGAS. It is unsafe for epileptics. It kills lab rats. Why are you still here? This show came out of the dark recesses of a coked-up guy's mind who has just been given too much privilege and access and now just takes a depraved delight in disturbing and scaring you. In fact, if we're being totally honest here, seriously, we can't warn you strongly enough. Do you need a doctor of some kind? What is the matter with you?
Listener's discretion is advised.
I've been keeping my ear to the streets. The UK run
Upfront warning, everyone. This has some hardcore content and sexual audio, I guess. Not sexual audio, but it has like themes of rape and sexual assault and heavy shit. So, forewarning. Do not let little children listen in car or heavy shit. Hope you enjoy. It's a bit dark, but that's how these things roll. Hopefully you're not offended. If you're offended, life's too short. Move on with your life. Get over it. You'll be right. Enjoy.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Shaun Jeffery.
The nation's long web of interstates provided the perfect hunting ground for a depraved predator. He preyed on hitchhikers wandering the roads. He held them captive, then tortured and raped them. When that didn't satisfy his warped cravings, he killed instead.
Arma was last seen at a truck stop on Indianapolis's south side in July 2007. Now, through DNA evidence, Kentucky State Police say a body found off the shoulder of Louis Nunn Parkway is hers. She's one of 3 women trucker Bruce Mendenhall is currently charged with murdering. Police say he targeted prostitutes and had the blood of at least 10 people in his truck when he was arrested in Nashville.
This is just not a normal, if there is such a thing, a normal homicide.
As we live out the span of our lives, certain practices arise, become commonplace and then fade as the world and times change. Thumbing a ride, or hitchhiking, fits that paradigm. History doesn't record the exact beginning of that term, hitchhiking, but it was probably during the training of young American men during World War I. More and more cars were replacing the means of travel. These soldiers would take advantage of a brief furlough to go home. They'd start hiking down the roadway, then put up a thumb when they saw a car coming to hitch a ride. And thus hitchhiking became an accepted mode of travel for those not wealthy enough to own an automobile. Nowadays, though, vehicles are everywhere and hitchhikers are rarer in most places. With hitchhiking, as with everything in life, there is an element of risk. It is inherent to our nature that we want to keep ourselves out of harm's way. But when you're stuck on the highway and need to get somewhere, perhaps you break down on a country road. That doesn't always work out. Sometimes we accept the help offered from a stranger that just might be a psychopath. When it comes down to disappearances and murders, there are two groups of people that are considered easy prey. One is prostitutes, the second is hitchhikers. Long-haul truck drivers have the perfect job, it would seem, for cruising the highways and plucking up easy victims. In 1998, long-haul truck driver Wayne Adam Ford walked into the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office in California and confessed to killing 4 women. As proof, he brought a severed female breast in his pocket. Keith Hunter Jesperson, another long-haul trucker, also turned himself in during the mid-90s with a voluntary confession of his crimes. At the time, Jesperson claimed to have killed more than 160 victims, though he later recanted and confessed only to the murder of 8 women across 5 states. He followed a simple method: strangle the life out of a stranger, dump the body in a strange, different location, then get back on the road. Although sometimes, he didn't settle at just dumping the body. In January 1995, Jesperson committed a brutal homicide. He picked up a 21-year-old hitchhiker, Angela Sabriz, whom he offered to drive from Spokane, Washington, to meet her boyfriend in Indiana. On the journey, he raped and strangled her. He then strapped her body face down to the undercarriage of his truck, so her face and prints would be drowned off by the road while he drove. It was just after 5 p.m. on the 26th of November, 2013, when Timothy J. Vafides rolled up to the Red River Way Station outside of Moorhead, Minnesota. The surrounding farmland in the Red River Valley is peaceful for the most part. Fields of beet, soy and corn spilling across North Dakota and Minnesota for miles. It's only here, just off I-94, that the stillness is disturbed by the downshifting diesel engines and hissing air brakes of 18-wheelers pulling into the way station. Approximately 1,300 rigs pass through this station each and every day. By the time Vafides arrived that night, a pair of commercial vehicle inspectors on duty had already checked the paperwork for hundreds of drivers, many of whom were bleary-eyed from logging hundreds of miles. But not Vafides. The man couldn't stop talking. As one of the inspectors, Cynthia Harms, would later recall in court testimony, amid all the jabber, she couldn't help notice the tips of something sharp inside his mouth. Something that looked like fangs. Vafides gave the inspectors an uneasy feeling, and so did the teenage girl sitting next to him, who refused to make eye contact and appeared to have bruises on her face. When the inspectors ran a computer check on the driver, they found a protective order filed in 1999, which barred Vafides from making contact with the girl in the passenger's seat. Harms called the Minnesota State Patrol. But this was all just the beginning for Vafides, who would soon gain notoriety as the, quote, vampire trucker for the years he had slaved and tortured women in his long-distance truck. That evening, while Vafides was booked at the Clay County Jail, the girl, identified in court filings only as Victim A for her own safety, told local detectives the harrowing tale of the past 6 months with Vafides. By her account, he had promised her an easy and lucrative summer job, but instead repeatedly raped and tortured her in the sleeper berth of his truck, which he called the Twilight Express. He had also forced her to wear a set of fake vampire teeth, and later used a Dremel power tool to file down some of her teeth to sharp fang-like points. In March 2014, Vafides was charged with multiple felony kidnapping and sex trafficking charges relating to victim A and another victim, victim B. By November 2014, court filings show the prosecutors had met with 4 other alleged victims, one of whom reported being sexually assaulted by Vafides as early as 1994, although not in his truck. 2 of the new victims had stories almost identical to those of victims A and B, from being duped into travelling with him, to the beatings and rapes, down to having their teeth filed into fangs. This sort of begs the question: how did a drill-wielding, vampire-obsessed trucker who carried his victims with him in his truck fail to appear on law enforcement's radar for over a decade? In 2004, the FBI started to notice a troubling pattern. Dead bodies were turning up with relative frequency alongside the stretch of Interstate 40 that connects Arkansas, Texas, and Oklahoma. The bodies belong mostly to transient women, often prostitutes with few commonalities other than their dangerous lifestyles and their final resting place in ditches close to the highway. The FBI and local investigators shared notes on dozens of cold cases, and by 2009, analysts had identified 500 murder victims, mostly along the nation's highways. The collaboration was in part thanks to a digital reboot of the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or VICAP, a cross-jurisdictional database of information on violent crimes. VICAP had existed since the 1980s, but it existed as an unwieldy paper catalogue of case notes from all across the nation, really. But in 2009, it was brought online to help trade valuable information about serial crimes, homicides, sexual assaults, and cases of missing persons and unidentified remains. This allowed cops to connect dots between cases across multiple jurisdictions. Whilst there's no evidence to suggest that truckers are more likely to become serial killers or rapists than anyone else, they may be more likely to get away with their crimes because they're constantly on the move. To quote an FBI analyst, they know their routes, they know where to pick their victims up and where to drop them off, or whatever euphemism you want to use for when they're finished with them. With highway killings, clues can be so few and far between that different jurisdictions need to communicate or there's no chance of putting the pieces together. One case in particular explains how VICAP should work. Long-haul truck driver Robert Ben Rhodes, the truck stop killer. He was arrested in Casa Grande, Arizona in 1990. The arrest of the truck stop killer took place after a state trooper happened to shine a light into the back of his truck. The trooper found a woman chained and screaming, naked, except for a pair of Lion King slippers. Authorities would allege that she was the last of potentially more than 50 women picked up for a ride in Rhodes's travelling torture chamber, where victims were chained, whipped, beaten, and raped. Rhodes is believed to have first killed in November of 1989. Though he was accused by only one unnamed victim of kidnapping and torture, the 18-year-old victim was a drifter, and when Rhodes was detained, the victim declined to press charges, feeling that she would not be believed despite extensive evidence. In her statement to police, she says that, quote, "I don't see any good in filing charges. It's just going to be my word against his. If there was any evidence, I would file." It was later asserted that she was fearful of Rhodes after enduring 2 weeks in his torture chamber truck. Rhodes preyed on hitchhikers and truck stop prostitutes. His first confirmed victims were Candace Walsh and her husband, Douglas Ziskowski. In January 1990, the couple were hitchhiking when Rhodes picked them up in his truck while on a long-haul journey. He immediately killed Ziskowski and dumped his body in Sutton County, Texas. He was not identified until 1992. Walsh he kept for over a week. During this time, he tortured and raped her multiple times before dumping her body in Millard County, Utah. A month after Walsh's death, 14-year-old Regina K. Walters and her boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones, both runaway teenagers from the Houston suburb of Pasadena, Texas, disappeared. Like with Ziskowski, it is believed that after being picked up by Rhodes, Jones was killed and disposed of, while Walters was kept so he could extend her suffering and at the same time extend his sick pleasure. Robert Ben Rhodes, the truck stop killer, was sentenced to life in prison in 1992 for the murder of Regina Walters, the teenage hitchhiker who was found dead and decomposing in an Illinois barn. Investigators found pictures of her in Rhodes's possession, including one of a pale Walters standing in the same barn in a long black dress with a terrified look on her face. 2 hands held up as if she's trying to stop what was coming. All she wanted was mercy, someone to save her, to reach a place of sanctuary, away from this lunatic. However, even reaching the safety of the nearest police station, sometimes that isn't enough either. During the summer of 1973, a frantic teenager by the name of Mary Ellen Jones came rushing into the police station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She was a 15-year-old runaway. Concerned authorities asked her what was wrong. Mary told them of a story that was absolutely earth-shattering. It sent chills down their collective spines, but only momentarily. Mary had a 16-year-old boyfriend, Mark Matson. They were a young couple, and since it was the 70s, the revolution of hoofing it was the cool thing. She stated to police that a middle-aged man that introduced himself as Eric pulled in near them asking if they would like a ride. Since they were young and fearless, they both accepted the generosity. The driver even offered them work to make a little more extra coin for their travels, and they were enthusiastic with this man's kindness. Eric drove them to his residence, and when the three arrived, things instantly changed into an unimaginable nightmare. He pulled out a firearm and held the young couple at gunpoint, eventually forcing them into a makeshift solid concrete building that was soundproof. Once in there, Eric made the two perform sexual acts on each other while he photographed them. During this, Mark, the boyfriend, saw an opportunity to retrieve the gun that Eric had. Unfortunately, it was a fatal decision, and Mark wasn't quick enough. Out of reaction, Eric shot Mark multiple times, killing him instantly. Mary began screaming with sheer terror. Eric began to dismember Mark's lifeless body in front of Mary, even decapitating him. Afterward, Mary was chained and raped a handful of times over a 24-hour period. Perhaps the strangest thing, though, Eric decided to let Mary go, but warned her not to mention this to anyone, specifically to the police. Yeah, okay, mate. For the sake of her own survival, she agreed to his terms, and shockingly, she was now free. Although there was a glimmer of hope for her now, her heartbreak would only return moments later. During her conversation at the police station and while she was telling her story, authorities contacted Mary's mother. They relayed the information that Mary had explained to them. Mary's mother, however, described her as a pathological liar. With that news in mind, the Fort Lauderdale police unabashedly shrugged Mary off and disregarded her story as complete bullshit. A few days later, neighbours of 44-year-old Eric called the police. They said they noticed him sitting outside on a lawn chair for 2 days straight without moving, and during one of those nights there had been a thunderstorm. It was soon found out that Eric committed suicide by mixing cyanide into his chocolate milk. As the investigation went underway, shocking discoveries came to the surface. Eric wasn't this man's real name. In fact, his birth name was Albert Brust, and his occupation was a building inspector. While searching his home combing for evidence, they found the dismembered remains of 16-year-old Mark Matson behind layers and slabs of solid concrete, which also led to the discovery of the torture chamber that Mary described. A diary was also found which contained the ramblings of Albert and his fantasies of abducting a woman, holding her captive and making her a sex slave. The last entry he wrote expressed his feelings on his latest victim, Mary Ellen Jones. He said that with this particular incident, it wasn't as gratifying as he'd hoped for. The entire experience, he wrote, was rather disappointing, which prompted his motivation to kill himself. Some people's minds are a deep, twisting well. It's not always the drivers that are the villains in these tales too. You might think you're doing someone a solid, giving them a lift, but really, you'd be picking up a big mistake. An example. The California Department of Corrections is offering a $20,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of a convicted murderer who escaped from prison in 1974 and was last seen in 1976. Carl Alfred Eder was convicted of murdering a mother and her 4 young children. In 1958, Eder had been homeless and hitchhiking when he was picked up by Thomas Pendergast of El Cajun. Mr. Pendergast took pity on him and let him stay with his family until he could find a job and a home. Whilst he was there, under their roof, Eder murdered Pendergast's wife and 4 children. Eder later told detectives that he'd exploded in a rage because one of the children, 4-year-old Diane, was, quote, annoying him. He shot the mother in the head. Then he stabbed each of the 4 children to death. Diane, 4, David, 9, Thomas Jr., 6, and Alan, 2. He waited at the house until Thomas Pendergast got home from work when he asked him for a ride to the train station. Thomas hadn't even been inside yet. He agreed and gave Eder a lift. When he returned home, he found his whole family murdered. Eder escaped prison in October 1974, where he'd been serving 2 life sentences for murders he'd committed when he was only 16. He left a note reading, "I've done enough time. I'm leaving." Eder would be 70 years old today. He's described as 6 feet 2 inches tall, 175 pounds with blonde or greying hair, blue eyes, scars on his left hand and abdomen, and a mole under his left eye. Ida had ties to motorcycle gangs and radical left-wing groups. It's possible that he was murdered by members of one of those groups who were nervous about his violent rhetoric. One informant even said that Ida had threatened the life of then-President Gerald Ford. One Special Service Unit member said, quote, "If he was spouting off all this crazy talk, it's likely they just put a bullet in his head and dropped him in a ditch, and that's where he's been ever since." So having weaved all these disgusting, morbid tales of how dangerous hitchhiking is, let's crunch some numbers though. As all these tales have originated in the US, we'll use that as a baseline. In 2007, the most recent year I could find reliable data, 2.4 million people died in the United States. Now that includes everything from like natural causes, diseases, accidents, murders, the whole lot. That same year, 18,000 people were murdered. 46,800 people were killed in motor vehicle accidents. 17,300 people accidentally shot and killed themselves. 22,600 people died from falling. 10% of murders occurred in a situation which would be unlikely to involve hitchhiking, such as like arson, babysitters killing children, and other things like sniper attacks or something. What we can draw from this then, even if we conclude that the remaining 90% of murder victims were all, which of course as we know would be false, related to hitchhiking, you're still almost 3 times as likely to be killed in a car accident than you are to be murdered. You're far more likely to accidentally shoot yourself or fall down and die than to be killed whilst hitchhiking. But still, are you going to risk it? You never know what car pulls over. You could be riding some highway to hell.
White brown land, seen a thing or two from the great out back on the beaten track. Let me share it now with you. All Aussie adventures, pack up your swag, let's go. All Aussie adventures, all Aussie adventures, time